Hello, everyone, and welcome again with Krauss with Mahezi. I'm today with one of my previous guests, Martin Krauss, who provided me with very insightful conversation last time, and that's why I decided to invite him once again. And the moment I tell you about the topic, you see, like you realize why this is so important. Once again, discuss. So Martin Krauss, first, let me introduce you. Martin Krauss is the CEO of FGK Research, a German, actually a global clinical research organization. You guys have like global expertise and one of the really credible organizations out there. He's also one of the founders, which is absolutely amazing. We had a brief chat with Martin before we started this episode, and he was telling me about what it's like to be a founder and a CEO behind the wheel for 20 plus years, which is absolutely incredible and amazing. And on top of that, he's the president of the German Association of Clinical Research Organizations, which makes him really on the front end of what's happening in Germany, and not only Germany, because Germany is one of the top countries performing clinical research in Europe, and not only in Europe, probably the first market after the United States that is being selected for running clinical research. And Martin, last time we discussed many different things around the CTIS, the new European initiative. And it's been a year since the CTIS, since we've discussed that, and slightly more since the CTIS is fully functioning, let's put it that way. So I'm very excited to have you again, and just understand, like, let me first start asking, a year later, are there any new challenges on the battlefield of clinical research?
Thank you very much also for a nice introduction, Maya. It's always a pleasure discussing with you during this podcast, but also before and exchanging. And Maya is as well as CEO, and so there are a lot of, exchange of ideas, which is very helpful for both of us. Regarding the new challenges, indeed, I think that many stakeholders in the clinical research area have recognized that there is quite a slowdown in clinical research over the last years. Investments in biotechnology goes down between 2021 and 2023 by more than 50%. So there was a real big decline. Overall, the costs in development, there have been some new publications, have shown that they are going into several $billions to bring one compound to the market, including all the failures and all the costs associated with that. So for investors, it's a little bit like, okay, return of investment is not that easy. So you need to really diversify your portfolio. And then it's a little bit like with higher interest rates. We have seen that in many countries, high inflation rate, higher costs, high interest rates, that the return of investment and the multiples needs to be even higher. And so investments into biotech, into clinical development, into clinical research going down quite a lot. And that puts a lot of pressure into all the stakeholders, especially also in the CRO industry. And I think the majority of the companies have recognized that. And that's really a big challenge. And what happens, of course, and there's some global competition. So new regions have gained strength again. Not only Asia Pacific or China perhaps, but also India, South America. So there's a lot going on, and Mexico also. And looking into Europe, where we are doing some majority of our clinical trials and we are based in, and there's a hard competition in that. And this is really a big challenge for everyone. This is more so a global perspective. Going to a European perspective, then obviously there are still CTIS, some difficulties with that. I will talk about that perhaps in a minute. And then it's also the competition among the European countries. On one hand, trying to harmonize, and on the other hand, to being perhaps a little bit more competitive than the other ones. It's an exciting period, at least, I would say these words.
Yeah. By the way, thanks for mentioning that. And I knew that there was a decline in investment. Maybe didn't even expect 50%. Like that's a huge percentage. And you mentioned it's a global thing. One thing I also saw in the last year or so is that there was a shift in the way the big pharmaceutical companies, like, they're planning their pipelines and research, which I think also contributed to a little bit of a dynamic on the market, not in the positive way. But a lot of big pharma companies also decided to maybe reduce their pipelines. But even if they don't reduce their pipelines, they definitely started reducing the amount of countries that they go to and conduct their research. I see that happening. You spent a lot more time than I did in clinical research, but I started maybe like 17 years ago. I see there are these episodes where companies like, let's go broad, let's go with multiple countries to make sure that we optimize for recruitment speed, for example. Let's go to the must-have markets where we know we're going to reimburse our drugs, but let's also get these other markets that will, let's say, compensate for speed. But now we're entering this phase, at least that's my observation, where we're like, okay, maybe we should just go to the countries that we are anyway going to market our treatments and not spread thin with multiple countries. So that also, in a way, makes the market very dynamic. Speaking about Europe, Martin, one of the latest events that made Europe a little bit uncertain when it comes to clinical research was this initiative around CTIS. And that was, I invited you last year to discuss that. Let's first start with what CTIS is actually. What's the goal behind CTIS, just as a short reminder, and then let's move on. What happened a year later?
Yeah. So yeah, from a background, it was in 2014 already. The so-called clinical trial regulation, CTR, clinical trial regulation, comes into effect in principle, but the application was depending on setting up a so-called EU portal, an electronic system where all the clinical trial submissions could be handled. And this portal is, in the meantime, the name is CTIS Clinical Trial Information System. And this comes into application only in 2022 with a 1-year transition period, more or less, so, where you can still use both system, the old one and the new one. The general idea about a clinical trial regulation is an excellent one. We wanted to have more harmonization across Europe. Means a regulation means that it directly goes into national law, so that it's a European law that is mandatory for all member states, compared to directives which are just needed then to transfer it into national law. So a regulation is much stronger and provides harmonization. However, as you know, in Europe, so many different member states, there are a lot of opt-out procedures and still areas where you can do your own or define your own procedures which are not defined in the law. So this is one thing that we have on one side the attempt to have more harmonization, which is definitely coming, because what's going on now is you wanted to run in 10, 15 EU countries a clinical trial. You submit it once, it's one process, and at the same time, you're getting the approval with a consistent same protocol. In general, this is working. This procedure is divided into two parts, part 1 and part 2. Part 1 is very harmonized. Part 2 is more towards the ethics committees, and this is in principle based on a national procedure, and this is completely different. However, timelines, everything has been harmonized. So in general, super important, the right way. And then this clinical trial information system should be a portal that is user-friendly and helpful, and everything goes via the system. At the end, unfortunately, it's not. There's still a lot of trouble with the system. There are a lot of very time-consuming workarounds, how they handle it. And they are not doing important things like, for example, I'm providing an example. If you cross-check the system in principle several times a day, because there's no automatic email alert if something new coming in. Now, then you have your access rights, but from a CRO perspective, you have running 10, 15, whatsoever, lots of different trials at the same time. So you have different teams handling that. And then you need to get all of them in principle access, or specific team cross-checking all the time, all the different projects, whether there is a new document in that you need immediately processing. And this is just one example of 50, I would say, where it's the system is not as it should be. And unfortunately, despite all this pressure, EMA is not willing, looks like, to put constantly more efforts on this system to improve. We talk about that they are going into a maintenance level beginning of next year, but main issues have not yet been resolved. That's one part of the truth. The other one is, of course, it's not impossible to run the system. It needs much more training than perhaps expected. It needs experts. It needs a smart project management, time planning, and including different processes, backup systems. You have only a short time to reply. So there's a lot of things that needs to be done. But if you have set it up probably in your company, you will succeed. I can provide an example from our company. We have just submitted 79 centers in 10 different countries in Europe with one submission, and this is possible. Then you're getting the full, say, even if it was cumbersome and could have been easier, then you're getting the full power of this harmonized procedure in Europe.
Interesting. So is it fair to say that overall the harmonization, should the idea behind the harmonization is to speed up things and make it simpler process for anyone who wants to conduct clinical research in Europe? But because of the technicalities, exactly, like technicalities around the portal, how functioning this is, actually the effect is not there yet.
Yeah, I think the effect is still there, but you need to a little bit better preparation, and everyone needs to be aware once the time is running. If you are getting the deficiency letter, which is called request for information in the system, you have only for formal deficiencies, you have 10 days, and for contents deficiencies, you have 12 days, lender days. And that means you need to be incredible fast, reply that you are not missing the timelines. And if you have missed the timeline, you start completely from scratch.
Oh, wow.
So there's no fallback position. And so you need to really have an excellent organization in the CRO together with the sponsor. Everyone needs to be aware. This is now the hot period, 12 calendar days, hardly working over the weekend to make sure that you keep the timelines. And if you are able to do so, then you succeed. And I mean, there are, of course, a lot of more success stories than failures, but there are also some failures because of the system, because of the difficulty to handle everything like that.
And Martin, you mentioned that your team have already become an expert in that. But is there anything useful that's out there, like any training provided, anything that you would recommend for how do you get to know how the CTIS works? Or it was just like purely trying, failing, and trying again, failing again, and trying.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much training material and options out there that you need. It looks like you need a training for the training before, because there's so much out there. It's impossible to do it fast. The best thing is to be guided by someone who has already experience, and then make your own experiences. We started this process 1 or 2 years prior to getting into a fact or application to be prepared. And then once it started, we have worked on the sandbox area until the first project came. So there were quite a lot of efforts to make sure. Even then, there are here and there surprises, but then it's a matter of attitude to say quick reactions, fast decision processes, being really flexible. And I think you need to build up experts here for CTR, for CTIS, especially. Otherwise, there's a high rate of failure.
That's interesting. Like you can go in a company and just check how many CTIS experts are there. So I know my trial will be just fine in Europe. That's very interesting. One thing you mentioned that was very interesting. You mentioned that the EMA is planning to go into maintenance mode as of next year. So that means they haven't changed their deadlines, even though they're not there yet with the portal. Or do you expect them to change the deadlines? If they don't have a functioning platform, why would they go into maintenance?
Yeah, you never know. I mean, on one hand, EMA is responsible. On the other hand, there are also procedures behind. I think they have a tender process, I think, every 3 years. And it looks like that a new software company needs to be selected because of this European tender process. And this doesn't help. And everyone has programming, like you in your company, who is programming, and is saying, oh yeah, I changed the teams in the middle of, say, a certain development. This is a disaster, and this is what we get here. So there's some, I hope that EMA, they are aware that they need to improve. Currently, it was always the message, if there's a workaround, independent of the time consuming and what cumbersome, whatever it is, it's resolved. It's not anymore an issue. And this is the contrary to be user friendly. So we keep on going to push EMA and also I would say to everyone, write to EMA, there's a help desk, just to make sure that they know, we are not yet.
Yeah. So that's a great question, actually. Are the CROs united? You're heading the German association. I know there are other associations across Europe. Are these associations and also the CROs in these associations united to work together and provide sustainable and actionable feedback to EMA?
Yeah, in principle, I would say yes, it is, because everyone is suffering, of course. This was also a little bit a political process, and also the stakeholders, the CROs, but also the Pharma Association have been part of developing CTIS, or at least testing and checking CTIS and approving CTIS. So there is some, they are cautious not to be too harsh. On one hand, they were pushed to release it. On the other hand, it's not yet there. But we are united here in our business, definitely, also with authorities, ethics committees, and other stakeholders, that we need some more improvements. So I'm optimistic that step by step we'll get there, because we are not stopping complaining about it.
So that's the thing, Martin, that, for example, our company, when I started together with my co-founders, Find Me Cure, some years ago, we first built this platform for patients. Since then, we've been asked like so many times to join European projects and contribute one way or another. And I always wanted to do that, and I still want, and I'm still exploring that. But then, exactly like you said, these consortiums, like these big organizations, they tend to really work very slow, and things that are super easy on the technology, from a technology point of view, turn out to be some of the most complicated things to solve, which is a very interesting observation. But maybe we need to rethink not just the CTIS, but in general how we do European projects and how we manage these projects, because at the end of the day, we all need solutions that are actually working and in a timely manner. Like, especially here we speak about a whole market, a whole industry, and also let's not forget the patients at the end of the day. But speaking about changes, you mentioned also about another thing that's coming up in Germany, the Medical Research Act, which I don't know anything about, and I'm absolutely honest here, so I can't wait for you to tell me what's happening, what is this Medical Research Act, and why anything new happening in Germany alone.
Yeah, so I think it started many years ago when Germany, as the largest, by population, the largest country in the European Union, declined in the number of clinical trials, at least industry clinical trials, and everyone was a little bit alerted why we are going down, while other countries, like, for example, Spain, really developed well and got more clinical trials. And there was, from the different associations, there were expert reports evaluating the whole situation, what can be done, what are the reasons for that. And finally, with enough pushing the politicians, so we are very happy that the Ministry of Health had started with a strategy paper about potential improvements, and now we are in the legislation process, and it's already nearly done. So the final version of the Medical Research Act is already approved by the Parliament. And now we have this federal system. There needs to be approval end of September, and then it goes into effect. So, and we have worked now the last 9 months intensively with the Ministry of Health, with the authorities, with the different stakeholders, to make sure, with expert reports, to make sure that we get from the very first draft, step by step, even more improvements to push clinical research in Germany. And one of the say obstacles, for example, is the contractual, the investigator side contracts or agreements, side agreements that took much too long. So at a certain point, it was always going longer. Lawyers came in from the hospitals and from the sponsors, and they discussed endless, and it took sometimes 9 to 12 months to get a contract in place for running a clinical trial. And in other countries, Spain on a regional basis, France overall, they have binding contracts for that purpose. And so you're just taking the standard contract. Everyone's, I say, put in the names, yeah. And in France, it's even better. They have as well a budget possibility, which is binding and which is every year renewed. It's an excellent system. And then you're just signing and you continue to go ahead. So very often Germany was left out or started much too late due to that. And this is one of the big successes we had here in our association as well. What we did is end of last year, we had a lawyers in for an expert report, whether it's possible to get binding contracts in Germany as well. You could say, oh yeah, there's European law. Why shouldn't it be possible if it is possible in France? But sometimes you have national peculiarities with basic laws that, because there's a certain freedom in agreements everywhere. And you need to cross-check whether how you can do that in a binding way. So in a very long time in this law, it was like, oh yeah, we announced that there are some, say, standard contracts available. You can use it, but there was no binding. And now in the last version, when we have pushed and pushed that we need it, now it will be possible for Germany to have, or the government, or say the right words, the government needs to do a legislative regulation to make them binding. And we are working on that. So we have now reached the next step in. That's just one example on simplifying, say, clinical research in Germany. There are other ones like if you had any radiation procedure or additional procedure in a clinical trial, very often in oncological trial for evaluation purposes, you need to go to a separate authority. This has been completely removed. This go now via CTIS, via the usual authority ethics committee process. Examples like that will improve for mononational trials. We have reduced timelines. So there are a lot of different positive things. We are not, I would say, it's always like that. You're never satisfied, but we are happy that we have many, many improvements. And this is important to say and also to distribute outside. So Germany is perhaps not the best country to do good public relation and promoting positive aspects, always complaining a little bit around. I think UK is excellent in that, in promoting. So clinical research in Germany is really, it's getting better and better here now over the next months. We are intensively working on the implementation over the next maybe 12 months when step by step everything is coming in after the Medical Research Act. And this will definitely be helping us being more competitive again compared to the other European countries. Of course, this is a process that should not stop. We have always pushed as well in this Medical Research Act to get a re-evaluation. I mean, what you're doing, you have a certain objective to improve clinical research. You're taking measures. Then you need to control these measures. You check whether you have reached the objectives, and then you adapt. So this last cycle of checking and potential adaptation is not in the law. It would have been possible, but they have not done it, despite the fact that we wanted to have it. This is a little bit like CTIS, the connection. It's written down that after 5 years, which is unfortunately the only 2027, and prior you need to collect all the deficiencies, there's a re-evaluation whether the objectives of the law have been reached and what needs to be done. So this is a little bit like a mandatory procedure for the legislation to adapt if necessary. And this is something which is a good thing. I think 5 years is too long period for the Medical Research Act. Unfortunately, we didn't get it overall, but we keep on going also here to work with, we had a lot of good interactions with the different stakeholders and also the Ministry of Health to keep on going to improve clinical research in Germany.
Yeah, that's very important, and like you said, it's a step forward. If we always wait for the 100% solution, then we'll always be stuck in waiting for the solution. So it's better to make tiny steps, but towards the right direction, and checking if that's the right direction. So I'm very excited. Maybe you mentioned that, but if you can repeat once again, when do we expect this Medical Research Act to be up and running? Has it already started, or we're expecting that later this year, next year?
September 27 this year. It will be completely approved, and then I think it needs 2 or 3 days, maybe October 1st, something like that, when it is published in the I would say Bulletin or so. Then it's into effect. Some of the procedures or measures will only come into effect July next year. This is about ethics committee, specialized ethics committee that needs a little bit time to prepare and to set it up. But all the other remaining things, the important things will come quickly and immediately. Yeah. So,
well, I guess that whoever is interested in that can follow your FGK Research blog, because you guys usually have a lot of great and useful materials. And it will be very interesting once this is up and running to see what will be the difference between maybe timelines and procedures before and after that, because then people, when they can compare that was how much time it took before and that's how much time it will take today, then they can really see, oh, there is a difference, and let's consider that. But I want to go one step back because when you mention the Medical Research Act and you want to actually, and the fact that throughout the years, research has declined in Germany, rather increased. Honestly, I never thought that you're going to say that it's because of the contracts with investigators. Don't get me wrong. That makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense because timelines is one of the main things that you consider when starting your trial. But then
That was one example, but an important one. Yeah. It's surprising, isn't it? Yeah.
It
Yeah,
is surprising.
it is.
It is very surprising because you would think one of the top countries being selected for research like this not to be there, it is surprising. So
Yeah.
I'm so happy that you recognize that and now you're fixing that. But when I say one of the top countries being selected for research, why I'm saying that because I work with both clinical research organizations, but also with pharmaceutical companies, biotech companies, and Germany is one of the countries that's always considered for clinical research. But the rationale, whenever I ask, is not because of the timelines for conducting research, but usually timelines and let's say the reimbursement. Basically, what happens after like the clinical trial is done, you have the positive results, your drug is approved, and then what is the likelihood of this drug or medical device, whatever this is, to be actually accepted by the reimbursement authorities.
Yeah.
And generally speaking, Germany is one of the countries with pretty good timelines in that regard and very, let's say, also budgets available to implement the newest treatments available. Obviously, it's not for everything. There are limitations, but if you compare to other countries, Germany is probably one of the countries that provide one of the best standard of cares in the world. To give you an example, whenever I was discussing Poland as a country to conduct clinical research, Poland is one of the best recruiters, also with huge population. But if you see, and their timelines are actually pretty good for starting your clinical trial, but if you see the timelines for getting something reimbursed compared to Germany, you see that actually Poland is very, very slow. And not just Poland, that's just one example. So where do you see actually this standard of care playing a role in attracting more clinical trials? And honestly, like in the last couple of years, if there was a decline in clinical trials, I would have assumed that it's because people, generally speaking, Germans have a relatively high standard of care, and therefore their motivation for joining a clinical trial is much lower than, let's say, someone from Bulgaria or even Poland.
Yeah, I mean, one of the measures would have been that our standard of care is going down dramatically, and then we have perhaps more patients willing to enter clinical trials. But I think it's not a good idea to do so.
I don't think it's a good idea.
Yeah, but you're right. So there are as well interesting statistics about per 1 million inhabitant, how many patients are entering clinical trials, and in Germany it's 1,500. In Denmark, for example, it's the number one country, 30,000 patients per 1 million inhabitant going into clinical trial. But even larger countries like UK have 20,000, US 12,000. And it's not only a matter of standard of care. That could be one argument, but it's also a little bit about what is missing is, I think, awareness in maybe in many countries, but it's now talking about Germany and the German population, that participation in a clinical trial is not only a burden. It's not only, even if you're getting control group, you will benefit of that in different ways. You have much better care with your investigator. You have more interactions. I mean, the investigator talks to you much more than you're going usually to any examination. There's a lot of things that are positive. And one of our suggestions, what we wanted to implement in principle, is that we are getting a positive campaign within Germany about participation in clinical trials, because it's not only beneficial for the patients, also the whole medical staff is getting, say, to the newest treatment options, early access. It's much better trained. If you think about key opinion leaders in certain indications, if they are coming from your country or from your area, then they have a lot of students around that are trained on the newest technology. They are getting faster access. Usually you are getting as well a faster market access within that country because there's already experience. And if you think about very sophisticated cancer treatments like CAR-T, where you also need a whole logistics around, if you're not building up that in your area, in your country, then you are getting quite late, if at all. And this is a little bit like there is a real good reason for every country, I say, to push clinical research, despite all the other aspects. It's good for patients, good for the medical treatment for the whole population, but it's also contributing to the society also financially because it's high paid jobs that are setting up. It's an overall like a little bit like a win-win-win-win situation.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why we are so convinced that we need push clinical research also within Europe. And look at US, for example, they have quite high reimbursement, but they are talking about that because it's so expensive there. It's very expensive to run clinical trials. Still, it's the number one country. They are running a lot of clinical trials, even if it's expensive, because then you get access to the market. And just doing with different also political decisions, try to bring back clinical research to yes or to support it even more. And I think that's always good that Europe is as well doing the same way.
Yeah, so like you said, now with the Medical Research Act and the high standard of care, basically reimbursing more treatments, you have the two really good ingredients to make Germany even more attractive for clinical research. And I do agree with you, Martin, having to rely on clinical trials for a family member, firsthand know that this can be a true option in many scenarios where you don't have any other options, or even if when you do have an option, it can be a better option. So yes, I agree with you that clinical research should be promoted more in a positive way. With the only one caveat on my side, key opinion leaders should speak about it. Definitely, they should definitely educate students and like more people to know that clinical research can be a good career option, because that's something that I've discussed with some other friends of mine. That education in clinical research is not that popular, which is very weird because, like you said, it's usually well paid job, very interesting, very also rewarding because you're doing something that actually has impact. But also I believe that we need to raise the awareness from patients to patients, people that have actually participated in these trials, that have decided to join on a clinical trial. And I've just also like recorded another discussion with a patient advocate, the way she had to decide for going for a clinical trial lately and how she had to make this decision and how for her it was no brainer, and she felt very lucky that she has this option. So this is the type of things that we need to raise, not just from the science perspective, but you know, when you hear something from people that are like yourself, you just generally trust them much better. So hopefully next, after the Medical Research Act, you or we will unite actually to speak more loud about the benefits from the patient's perspective of joining a clinical trial and what it can look like for you.
Absolutely, I agree. And you have mentioned even some more arguments, and there are many more about participation in clinical trials, especially for some patients with that disease could be the very last option as well. So there are so many good arguments to support clinical trials. Also, as a patient, if you are thinking, or one of the topics, or perhaps I can mention it as well. What a little bit is very important to me as well. Clinical research became so expensive, and I mentioned it at the very beginning of our discussion. And one of the difficulties is it's such expensive, then many developments will not be done because there's no return of investment, especially in rare diseases, in unmet medical needs, where it's not worthwhile to do so because there's no possibility for return of investment. And then, of course, commercial companies cannot do that. That's not their task even. So also say these words. So we need to make clinical research more efficient, whatever it takes in principle. Because if it's more efficient, someone said to me, oh, that's bad for your CRO business. I say, no, it's not bad for my CRO business. It's excellent. It's excellent for everyone, because then we can do development in many more indications and use our resources there. So this is also a very important topic to me, that we have developed in a way, in a very regulated framework, where sometimes you're doing formal things that cost a lot of time and money at the end without any, say, support for patient security or for higher quality. I think that we need to rethink about processes and efficiencies in clinical research, that we really concentrate on what is important in quality to make sure that the data are reliable and valid, and the results, but that we are not, say, checking 10 times unimportant parameters for nothing because one inspector or one auditor has mentioned it once and we think we need to do it all. So that's perhaps also a message that's important for the sake of patients. I think that's completely different story, but yeah, wanted to mention it.
No, you're absolutely right. And that's exactly what I'm passionate about. That's exactly the reason I started this podcast in the first place, to speak about how can we make clinical trials more efficient.
Yeah.
Sometimes, Martin, just like sharing with you and whoever is listening, I kind of feel that we're maybe like with all the other technologies, for example, space technologies, they start being super expensive. It seems that the application is basically like nothing, just for some like adventurous missions and stuff like that. But history showed us that a lot of these technologies turn out to be something that is for common practice and something that everyone on the planet Earth can actually use, and actually allow us to do a lot more than we even expected. So I guess with a lot of these new um, more like costly research clinical trials that we're doing, hopefully with the time we'll find a way to make them more efficient. We'll find new technologies, or let's say we'll just make these technologies more scalable. But I agree with you, we need to constantly think, how can we make clinical trials more efficient? How can we make the most out of them and make and conduct more clinical trials? Because there are many, but there's still not enough, knowing how many diseases are out there and how many people are struggling. Martin, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for enlightening us once again on what happens with the CTIS, with the new Medical Research Act. It's super exciting and even contagious with your energy, not only doing your business and trying to do the best for your clients, but actually doing what's best for the society and the whole clinical research industry. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for hosting this podcast, interesting ones. Also with your other guests, I think you're doing a great job and you're so enthusiastic about the whole industry and so on. That's really excellent for all of us and inspiring, I would say, for our daily work. So thank you very much, Maya.
Yeah, we'll probably have another chat a year from now to see the Medical Research Act, whether really it attracted more clinical trials.
we will look into that. Indeed, yeah, we can do that.
Great, Martin. Thank you once again.
Yeah, thank you very much, Maya.